Welcome to this Sunday virtual class sponsored by BYU Library Family History in Provo, Utah. Our class today will be Secrets Hiding in DAR.org, or meaning Daughters of the American Revolution.org, presented by Marilyn Thomsen, a longtime genealogist and teacher of family history, and we greatly appreciate her preparations and willingness to share her knowledge with us on this topic. So I'll turn the time over to you now, Marilyn.
Well, welcome. This is wonderful to have you all come join me. And in this first screen, I have my contact information there, marylandthompson@gmail.com. And I also have the link for the handout, but also in chat, Brother Pace has also put a link that you could get the handout if you would like. Okay. And sometimes it's nice to be able to have those written notes that are going along. Some people like that. We're starting out here with a picture of Molly. Molly picture. She is a Revolutionary War patriot. Her husband is shown in there was shot down, and she jumped up and picked up his ramrod and helped them to win the battle. So we should start out by saying, what is a patriot? And a patriot is a person who was loyal to the American Revolution. And it can be a woman, it can be a man. There are some Canadians who were loyal to America and didn't like the British. There are some Spanish, even down in Mexico, they took up a collection of little coins, and there's a list of them, and they are patriots. And then there are some French who served in those ships, and their descendants have joined through their lineage. So we can't just think of patriots as just even military. Patriots in the American Revolution are also those who don't served oaths of loyalty, people who served as a sheriff in a new government. Imagine that the British would shoot you if you were out collecting taxes to be able to serve the new country. And so there's just a real broad spectrum of patriots that are allow you to become a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. So we're going to go to the next screen. So let's talk about how the Daughters of the American Revolution started. Lineage societies really became popular about the time of the centennial of the American Revolution. And so in 1876, this is a picture of these men that they like to do battles. They like to prove that they are sons of the American Revolution. But then in 1890, they got a little uppity and decided no women were allowed. And the women said, what? No mothers of the revolution? And so the Daughters of the American Revolution decided they're going to find their own organization. And their common bond is the fact that each had fathers or grandfathers who are patriots. And I want you to take a breath and think about that. So in 1890, if you had a grandfather who was, say, 10 years old in 1776 and lived till he was 90, you would be alive perhaps and knew that grandfather. So some of these women actually knew their patriots or were granddaughters of these patriots. And so the records that they created at the time they're trying to prove their lineage were very close and very intimate to these patriots, and they were very loyal. So in 1890, there's a Revolutionary War widow, Mary Smith Lockhart, and she hosted the first meeting. And now we have millions of members, and they're all over the world. And when these women started this organization, they didn't want it to just be a social party organization. And often in movies that, we portray them as stuck-up old women, that are looking down on other people. But it's what they wanted to do is to honor their patriot ancestors through service. and to help other people to remember these patriots, but also to serve their community. And so there's like 35 different committees you can serve in, anything from supporting schools and teaching school children about the Constitution. They go in and they help veterans. They raise funds for veterans' homes. They just they do help with legislation to protect monuments or historical markers. It's really amazing. But one of the most important thing that they did is they started going into indexing the genealogical records and cemeteries and Bible records. And so they are really a powerful force. Originally, in this picture, you see there's some African Americans in the pictures. And originally, the picture that you'll see is that they were excluded, but that's not true. Is what it is you just need to have a biological connection to an ancestor. Now, some lineage organizations allow you to go through your husband or through your father, your stepfather, or things like that. But this is the one thing that they do is they say you have to prove a biological line. And the requirements now have even started to include DNA to allow you to join. Interestingly enough, I live in Utah. At one time, they wouldn't allow polygamous lines to join the DAR, but now they have pulled back and they have recognized that we want to be very inclusive. In fact, they even hold classes on how to research women and minorities and groups that perhaps wouldn't have as many records. So any woman 18 years or older who can prove a lineal bloodline descendant from an ancestor who aided in achieving American independence is eligible to join. But then she has to prove documentation for each statement of birth, as well as the service of the ancestor. This is my mother and this is my daughter, and they are members. My mother was just so excited to be able to join. She's from Georgia and had always wanted to be a member. And so when I was able to help her get her lineage, she was just really excited to feel like she was a part of this organization. So how you can join is you go on to dar.org, and there it says join, and you go in and you fill out a form, and then it's sent off to a chapter that's close to you. And so, like, for example, here in Utah, we have like 16 different chapters that you could join, and those individual chapters then will work to help you to prove your lineage and to process the documents, and that you are responsible for the lineage and the documents, but there is a registrar who is just ready to help you to work through that application process. You can go on to the DAR website and you can even see where these are located and say, oh, okay, that's the name of my chapter. I want to join the Princess Timpanogos chapter. So this picture here is the Wasatch Range chapter, which encompasses BYU. So there we go. So you're going to fill out a membership interest form. It'll be sent off. One of the main things I wanted to just stress is one of the reasons I wanted to join is because when I got my degree in family history, I was always amazed how many of the books that I was using were created by these DAR chapters. And my own pedigree is dependent upon they went into a cemetery and they wrote down the people in the cemetery. And in the South, it's sandstones, and those headstones are washed blank. And if these women hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to join. I also ran into these lineage books that my professors would say, you need to take a minute and look at these women who are so closely related to these patriots. In their applications, they have letters that were written and stories that were written and Bibles that they sent in. And so they stress that you really do need To become a good researcher, you really need to be able to understand and use the applications and also the documents they're created. So we're going to talk about these applications, okay? So there's a cover letter that's the person's information. And then there's a pedigree or lineage chart. And then there's a list of documents that support the information on the pedigree. Okay. Those first applications had letters that were written by the children. I recently read one, and it was her uncle, and her uncle says, "Yeah, we lived here, and so and so headed down to South Carolina, but most of the family went over to Tennessee." And I thought, wow, there are so many clues in this uncle's long letter about his family and how he knew this patriot. I thought this would be so valuable for anyone researching this family and this line. So this is the kind of it changes over the years, but this is a sample of the an application's first page. Then the next part is this lineage, and over time the requirements have tightened. And so now when you send in a lineage, you can see these little check marks here, okay? And each lineage has to be proven, but not just the information that's been submitted, but there has to be a document that proves the intergenerational lineages. And so on this one, for example, it says the 1850 census was used for connecting generation 4 and 5, and then it says generation 3 and 4 connected through a death certificate. And then number 3, it says that was a birth certificate. And so those are the type of documents that are sent in. And sometimes you wouldn't have access to, say, a Bible record that they sent in, or a probate. Just even a reference to a probate that exists opens up big doors and helps you to prove the documentation for your pedigree. Right now on the screen, I have underlined how the National DAR sits down with these, and if they see conflicts between the documents that are sent in and the information on the pedigree, they cross it out. I wish you could see this in color. It would be in red. And they have put the correct information. As you know, in genealogy, we're always balancing a conflicts. Which document is more valuable than the other document, and which one should we choose to use? And so these are professional genealogists that will say, sorry, the tombstone date is not as accurate as the date that we're going to use on the census, or something like that. And so you have these professional eyes that are looking at this pedigree. Right now on the screen, I've underlined this number, and it's what happens with these applications is if a prior application had sent in documents or has, say, proof of service, then it will refer to that earlier document or that earlier application. And so that number is the application that this application is being built on. In fact, that's what we do as registrars, is we hunt and find an already proven line that will help someone join. And so we say, oh, this is an easier line to join because it's already been proven than the one that makes your heart beat because it uses your father's surname or something like that. So this is a little bit blown up, so it's hard to see that other screen, but you could, if you look closer, you can see these numbers and these little ticks and checks and that proving this lineage. And this, what happens is every person who joins then has to update the information. And so, of course, as now records are becoming more digitized and available, the newer applications may have additional documents that are better and more valuable than the older documents or the older applications. So I mentioned how a person becomes a patriot. And so there are lots of soldiers who served in the Revolution, who could have even had pensions, who are not in the DAR database. And the reason is that either they didn't have children who have applied, or descendants that survived them. And so this isn't an all-inclusive list of every person who was a patriot. But what it is it's a lineage. Somebody's proved a lineage to a person. And there are three main ways to prove that they are a patriot. There is, of course, military service. So they're in a militia. They may have served state navies or French armies or the French Navy or the Spanish, any of those, if you can prove that. And so this page, is for the ancestor service. And so these are the documents that show that somebody has researched how they have served. And so this is valuable even for you to take a look at this and say, oh, look at these documents that I could go look at and find out about my ancestor, what they wrote and who he served with and how long he was in there. If that was the only thing, then that would be valuable for you, okay? Another way they could prove service is patriotic service. And I remember somebody says, well, my ancestor was a pacifist. Let's see, I'm trying to remember the name, a Quaker. And so therefore they couldn't have been a patriot, but that's not true. They could sign pledges, they could make donations, a lot of the Quakers, and that would actually bring supplies. They would provide the armies with supplies, or they would take care of the horses. They didn't fight. And so there's just a lot of ways to show this patriotic service. I might pause here to just say, sometimes people would become patriots, and then when the British marched into town and took over the town, then they were forced to sign documents that said they didn't support the revolution. And so some people, when they're disproved to or have turned away, let's say they're Canadian, if they, at the end of their life, they were still not patriots, then those are disproved lineages, and those will happen. And then there's community service. So for example, if they were a sheriff, they could have been killed by the British because they were supporting the new government. If they were the mayor of the town, if they were the clerk of the town, if they were the tax collector, if they even got up and gave speeches to support, all of those things qualify them. So now this part of the application is the references for the lineage. And so these are the sources. Let me just pause here to just mention the Sons of the American Revolution will use the Daughters of the American Revolution applications as proof of a lineage, but the daughters don't use the sons because they have stricter standards. I have even seen Sons of the American Revolution who have put down a Daughters of the American Revolution number, and it wasn't even for their patriot, it was for somebody else. And of course, nobody bothered to check that. And they got in and they actually didn't have a patriot lineage when I looked at it. But the daughters have been so careful and worked so hard to try and provide documentation. So this part, if you'll look here, you'll notice in the generation, let's see, 4, 5, 6 generation, it says the estate papers of John Huckleby probated in Marion County, Georgia. I have to tell you, I wasn't looking for John Huckleby in Marion County. I was looking for him in Wilkes County. And I went, oh my, that is amazing. That's so helpful. If I had ordered the documentation, they have a picture of the tombstones, and they have pictures of the marriage license. And then in the 7th one, it says, okay, there's estate papers that list John Huckleby as one of the descendants and his wife. And so again, this was just so helpful to me to be able to know that I should be looking for estate papers that somebody else had already sat down and gone over. This is another sample of documentation that was really helpful to me because they had a quarterly of the Genealogical Society that had, and they had deeds and things like that that they were using to be able to have these proof of the lineage. And then this is the bottom part of the proof. This has changed a little bit over time. You have an option of listing proven children if you have a document that has other children. Originally, you could just list children, and then it had this little column of whom they married. And you can't believe how this helped me strengthen my pedigree. I had no idea that there was a daughter who, here it doesn't give her name, Mason, but I found her name, her first name, and there's a Dory who married Isaac Clemens. And I when I went and looked for deeds, then I was able to see who these people were with daughters, and then to find the wives. This how can I say it, pointed me in the direction that I wanted to know or needed to know. This is a little bit more blown up of what I'm talking about. So, for example, here's John, and his wife that he married was Elizabeth Moore. And I knew John had a wife, Elizabeth, named in his probate, but I didn't know her last name was Moore. And then, so that's one of the things that helps. Okay, so those are application, but in addition to this, there's lots of indexes to records and family history that the DAR.org can link you to that you cannot find anywhere else. So what happened is the Daughters of the American Revolution immediately built this library. By 1910, they had, in Washington, D.C., they had their library. And the Sons of the American Revolution also have got a library, but it wasn't until 70 years later. And it's a beautiful library. If you're ever in Washington, you can go in and you can research, and you have access to these documents. They have been digitizing these applications, and you can sit down at a computer and you can access these applications and the documents there in the library. One of the things that you can access while you're there and actually online is what's called the Genealogical Records Committees. And so every chapter has a person who would go into the records and start helping to create indexes. And if you're looking at this, so this is intestate records of Fall River County, South Dakota. Well, if my ancestor is in Fall River County, South Dakota, wow, that could save me a lot of time to be able to go in and see what pages my ancestors listed on. If you've ever done probate work, you know it's a lot of reading of old handwriting. So now I want to go into the DAR.org. This is kind of the first screen that's going to come up. And they said, you know, free access to our records, honor your ancestors. This is what you would see. Okay, so on the left, you can see where it says library, okay? And that's about the library and the library's collections. And if you are going to come in, you really would want to be able to click on that. It also leads to a catalog. This is where you would hunt for family histories. They have an enormous collection of family histories and histories that have been published and then given to them that you won't find anywhere else, okay? If you're on there, when you click on this, they have a GRS tutorial. It's a little video you can watch and it explains how to use them, and it's much better actually than I am, but you might want to use it. But I'm going to try and walk you through these steps, okay? So on the top, there is the first tab that we're on is ancestors. So these are the patriots, okay? And so the first three on that tab are the ancestor, the members, and the descendants is actually a database that are interlinked. So you go to the ancestor, and then from the ancestor, you can see the descendants. And then among the descendants, you can see who the member is that gave the application. And so they keep going back and forth. And so you kind of have to pay attention to that. The second arrow says enter in the name of your ancestor. And so this one part is a little problematic because how many ways can you spell Huckabee? I have about 15, and a lot of the soldiers were German. And so you and your family have probably been using the German spelling, but it may have been Americanized. So you have to find out how the daughters have spelled it, and they've kind of created a little common spelling, but keep trying different spellings until you find your ancestor. So this is my tip on how to locate patriots in the database. I use the familysearch.org's the 7-generation fan chart. And as what I do is I start looking for ancestors that served at the time of the revolution in 1776, if they're alive. And I'll click on them. As I told you, there aren't very many women who served, but their fathers could have served. And so as what I do is I then put in the name. I put these two screens side by side in my computer. And so I have the one on the left, and then I would type in the one on the right. And then in Family Search, when you click in the fan chart, then it comes up with a little card. And then if you go ahead and search, then there comes up a list of people with the last name Huckabee. And then I put them side by side, and I compare the dates, and I compare the times, the places. And then if they match up, I say, oh, I've got a patriot, and I probably should take time to look into this application. You'll see what just came up over on the right. This is his ancestor number. And so every single application will have that number on it. And so you just make a note of that number so that you can come back. Another thing, that little card doesn't have the spouse, but you should check and see if your spouse is there. There may be spouses that have been proven later or you want to prove, but often I think, oh yeah, this is it. And then I'll realize that the spouse that is in Family Search isn't the spouse. And so sometimes that forces me to go into Family Search and do more research. So the application have their own numbers. So 2 numbers, a patriot's number, our ancestors number, and then there's an application number. So the individuals who have it. And then there is a column here. These are the children through whom someone has been proven. And you'll see there at the bottom is Salida. And I was the first person to prove that she was a descendant. And now look, there's 3 of them. Other people have built their applications based on mine. So if you were to click on any of those Salidas, then over here, there's the descendants. Okay, so you can see we're in the descendants database. And you can click on that little icon there, and then it will come to this page. And this page shows you the lineages. And so you want to, if there were 3 of them, you go through each of those descendants to see which one stays closest to yours. Or if you are trying to extend your pedigree, if you want to add more people, you might say, oh, hey, I didn't know there was another child by that name. And you may want to be able to extend your pedigree using that. Right there, you can see, you click on that number. Okay. Now, one of the problems that you'll run into is it will say that it was a short form, is what it's called. And is what happened is for a brief period of time, people were joining, they had joined, say, through another patriot, and then they just adopted the other one, and they didn't do all the documentation within their application. And so some of those applications aren't worth having. And so you'll see this come up that says that this isn't complete, or there's not a listing, and then there's something called a supplemental. So that's a person who joins for another patriot besides the original one that they joined. So then there's instructions for ordering the applications or the supporting documents or copies of the records. The applications are $10 each. If you want the documentation, it's another $20. And these are digitized almost completely. They're getting really close within the past few years. Just amazed how many are now available that weren't before. And you can just use your Visa or MasterCard and just pay, and then it'll come. And 2 o'clock in the morning, I can get these. I know. And they come as a PDF, and you can scroll down. You have about a week that you're able to download these. Okay. So now I'm going to click on the purchase there. So these are the different costs and things that you can do. So you can just get a copy of the application, or you can order a copy of the application with documentation, or you can just order the supporting documentation if that's what you want. There is also a DAR library search. So for example, when I was getting ready to prove mine, I knew there was this daughter that was mine, and I'm sure other people had applied. So I asked them, I said, could you send me the prior requests and tell me why they were turned down? And it's a search service that they do. And I think it was like $30. And then they came back with this list of documents that I didn't even know about. And there wasn't any conflict there. Our biggest problem was that she was born before the census that listed the other children. And so finally I was able to do a burden of proof of evidence that's showing that her husband was the executor of the state. And even though there were no documents that named him as the son-in-law, then I was able to prove that. Okay. So in the screen, there are some other little icons that you can see. So it says supporting documents available. So as we're looking at the screenshot there, you can see there are some that have the S for supporting documents, and then some have a list of descendants. And then there's a descendant list available for the member who gave the application. So in other words, it was a short form, but not this ancestor. And so before you go to purchase this, you need to take a look at these little icons to see what you're buying, to see if it's what you wanted. There's a little I with an S. Those are called short forms. Okay. And so you wouldn't want to order those. You want to order something that has the documents and the descendants list. All right. And then this is where you would order if you wanted documents to order the documents. Okay. So the term documentation refers to supporting materials with application, but remember how I told you those early applications may not have had documentation. So up until the 1860s, as you remember, they didn't have photocopy machines. And so a lot of the members requested their documents be returned to them, even if it's say a Bible record, they'd tear out their Bible record, send it in, it'd get approved, and then they would mail it back. But after 1894, everything is kept. So that's another reason to look close at these applications to see what you're getting. However, like I said, some of those early documents have copies of letters that were written in people who are telling about their ancestors. So it's something that you have to weigh. A supplemental is if I want a second ancestor, then I would send in a supplemental application. Okay. And so some of the documents may be in her original application. And the DAR doesn't guarantee that the documentation will be genealogical standards. So for example, a lot of the early ones would use published pedigrees. And so you have to look closely to see in that list of the application to see. So sometimes they now have a committee that is going over all of these applications as they're scanning them. And they are finding that sometimes these applicants used the same service for 5 men who have the same name in the same county, type thing. And so is what they have done is tried to separate those out and determine which applications may not meet the requirements that they have. And they're splitting out the service and things like that. And so you'll see this little alert that says you have to prove the correct service. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this person doesn't have service. As I said, there's a lot of ways to prove service. I have a friend, when she joined, she went and proved it was a community service rather than trying to untangle the military pension application that had been set. If you clicked on that little red, then it say, you have to prove the correct service. Okay. This is another red alert that'll come up in this database. It'll say you need to treat this as a new ancestor. And it could be that, they said, this is my grandfather, and here's a letter from my uncle, and he says that it is. And the DAR is saying, okay, that was okay then, but now we've tightened our standards and we just need a little bit more documentation. That doesn't mean don't apply using this or there's no value in the application. It just means that there's another step. They have a committee that is just doing amazing things in helping sort out these applications and verifying it. So the second part is the member. Okay, so let's say you have a relative you would like to search for, and so you could go ahead and search for a descendant, or you could search for them as a member. So let's say you want to know if your pioneer ancestor or the person that you're searching in Tennessee has any type of information on them. You can put their name in just this descendant search, and then it will bring up applications that may have that person, this Adam Ross, and then you could look at that application. Okay. So remember how those databases are all connected. And so this descendant search, then it would bring up the same thing. You would see the pedigree, and then you would order the application. Also, another thing that happens is they will make suggestions on different ways to spell surnames, trying to help you to be able to get the search. And as you scroll down, you're going to see this come up. This, I think, okay, descendant listings, and they'll say, okay, this is one of this person. So, okay, now we're going to move over into the next part. This is the Bible records. The DAR chapters started pounding groups and collecting in the chapters, begging for Bible records, and any Bible records that have been turned into historical societies, that they started to create collections, and they probably have one of the largest collection of Bible records in existence. And so they're not necessarily copies of the Bible record, but they could be, but they could be transcripts that somebody's typed it up and sent it in. And so for this one, for example, I'm going to search for Busby. And so this is what comes up. It says, this is a Bible record, and the Bible's is Ashcroft, but on page 21, there's a Sally Busby Godspeed. Okay. And the next line, it says Busby, there's a Charles Fremont Busby and his wife who's listed in a Bible. Some of these have proved really helpful. I have to tell you, I had an ancestor, whoops, let me go back, that I could never figure out where they were getting the middle names. And it wasn't until I located the Bible record, I realized that they got these middle names that they never used in any other documents their whole life. And also they had the full dates of their birth and the full dates of their death. And I go, where did they get all of this information? And it was in the Bible records. And so this can be a valuable information. So if I was to click on this 21, this is what you'll see. This is a page in a book, and these are all the people that are listed on that page. And so if I was to look and say, oh, wow, so Sally Busby Godshall, okay, that's the person that I want. And these are Sally Busby, these are the rest of her family, and I would want to order it. Or you may say, oh, my Sally Busby had nothing to do with the Godshalls. And so I don't need to order this or even take another look at it. Okay. So you can then from that page go on to at the DAR library, you would be able to immediately see the image of the page with the Bible and the transcript, or else you could order a copy of that page for, I think it's like $10. Okay. So these genealogical record committee reports, to get copies of those, then you would click there. Okay. And then you would be able to order that at 2 o'clock in the morning. And this is, could be what you could see. However, this is on ancestry.com. They have digitized some of these genealogical records books. And so as you can see at the top of this screen, it says historical collection of the Georgia chapters of the Daughters of the American Revolution, volume 5. And so is what I did is back here, you take the book's title and you can put it into the catalog of Ancestry or the catalog of Family Search, and you can see if that page or those documents have been digitized. Okay, so you can see here it says Bible owned by Mrs. Moyt in Cutbirth, Georgia, and that may be valuable for you. Okay, so now the Genealogical Record Committee searched. You can just search all of those books by all of those chapters for a surname. And so you would, for example, I'm typing in Huckleby in there, and then it will bring up all of these different reports. So before we were looking at Bible records, but now these are all the reports. And so one of the most valuable things is, for example, tax records. And if you've ever sat and gone through a microfilm of tax records looking for your ancestor, then you say, wow, this is valuable to be able to know that they are listed in this county and this tax record. They also have done court records and court minutes, and just to have an index to know what page they're on is just amazingly helpful. This is Georgia marriage records. Okay. And so just knowing that there is this marriage record, it helped me to be able to go and find that marriage record. But if we were to click on that, then I would be able to see this next page that's coming up. And so then I'm looking in here, and so Celia Huckleby's on that page. Okay. And I say, well, the Grahams, no. So it's just one record that would be on that page that has her name with it. The other people may or may not be related. Okay. So these are index, and so go ahead and check for the originals. It helps you to look for these originals in the other records. It just kind of helps to direct you to other records. So this, for example, is an ancestry.com Georgia tax digest, and once you know that there is a tax record, that will lead you to the tax records. So this is, for example, a page that is in Ancestry, tax records that are online. This is a book. You'll see this now that I'm telling you about it. You'll see all of these examples. One thing you should know, FamilySearch.org books have digitized a lot of these records, and the cemetery records are really valuable. So once you have found that these committees have your person's name in there, then you can go ahead and use them to be able to do your research. This is a picture of Celia Huckleby Fallon's headstone. And this shows you how everything has just been washed off. It's the sandstone. And I could not have ever found this, in the cemetery except for the DAR index record. Okay. Now, there's also, let me tell you, a long time ago, about 1/3 of what these books are that exist, the Genealogical Society of Utah went in and indexed a lot of them, but it's only about 1/3 of what is now. And then there is a man by the name of Kirkham, E.K. Kirkham, who then sat down with them and he published some books that point to those microfilms, those 35,000 microfilms from the Daughters of the American Revolution. And this is what it looks like, his book, and it's online, but he created his own magical code to these books. And so the first book gives his state abbreviation. So it's California. And then the film number. Now you have to remember that the people who are doing these indexes, I remember one of my professors saying the records from the East ended up in the West. So the Bible records traveled from the East to the West. Okay, the marriage records from the East went to the West, and that. So not always can you rule out a search for a record just because of the state that it's been put in, but you might. And so then the film number, and then you can just take and look at it. And so this is an index to the Bibles and families of the United States taken. So this is E.K. Kirkham's second book that he created an index to the Bibles. So just a little warning, he only put the general name of the family that had the Bible record. But the nice thing is that there's his special little code for you to be able to go in and look at those Bible records and those pages that somebody has typed up. Now, some states have created an every name indexes from their Genealogical Records Committee. And I have found in my research that this is just a time saver. I do a lot of Southern research, and they say our bread and butter is land records and the court records and the tax records, because nobody else has that tenaciousness to be able to go into these. But this is, if you were to buy one of those genealogical record reports. So for example, I did a research on Jacob Binkley. And these are all of the court record minutes and court records that had his name on it. And it wasn't until I got to the very last 3 pages, 505 and 511 and 523, that I finally found the documents that then linked him to the other generations. And so I just was crossing these off. But this is so helpful to me to be able to see, what the page numbers. This is another genealogical record report is from South Carolina, and they claim this is an every name index to the genealogical records. And so this is for my family Ross. And so in here, it names what the record is, and then it tells you the film number that it's listed on. And this was helpful for me to be able to find some wills and find some cemeteries. And of course, that's before Find a Grave. But let me say this. Find a Grave is helpful, but it really is just an index. And often the DAR will accept the books over Find a Grave, because it's a Find a Grave is called a compiled record that somebody has compiled if they don't have, say, a headstone, or if they don't cite a sexton records. Many of these cemetery records came from sexton records, and they may be more accurate even than Find a Grave. We will always be grateful for Find a Grave, right? So this is the South Carolina Index to Genealogical Records. This is what I was showing you. These are all Daughters of the American Revolution books results when I typed in George Ross. Okay, and this is the lineage book. So what a lineage book is, before they had, we had the online dar.org, with the Patriots listing, they had these lineage books that every good research library had a copy of the lineage book. And then they would have the DAR number and the person that submitted, and then they would have a copy of this lineage. And then you could go ahead and send off a request for a copy of that application. So these books are good in one way because of spelling, and you can look for how the DAR spelled the name. However, remember when we were looking back and we saw how they have looked through these applications and updated the documentation, and that these may have been disproven. And so it's important to use our online database before we use these lineage books, okay? This is Ancestry.com, historical collections of the Georgia chapters from the Daughters of the American Revolution. And so then it shows a list of marriages that were compiled. Okay, family search books. This is one, the Nevada DAR Records Committee report, Nevada cemeteries, family history, marriages, and Bible records. And so then you would take a look at this, and it will be a typescript, including Bibles and things. And so what would happen is I would type in, say, a person's name and Nevada, and that would pop up, and then I would know that this is the book that I could go and see online at Family Search. This is another one, Graves and Soldiers of the American Revolution. And again, it's online at familysearch.org. And then last of all, these are the library services that they will provide, and they will help you to provide documentation for service. Last of all, each of the chapters, this is a page that a registrar has. So the registrars, to help them to research lineages, have access to the images, and they understand how the site works. So these little icons that are up here on the top right hand, as a registrar, they would be able to look at these and see if there's something valuable. These, there is, you kind of raise your hand and swear an oath that you will not use this for private research, but you are just to use this to assist people with their applications. And so please don't ask a registrar to break her oath, okay? But if you are considering joining, do it. I remember one of my professors had said, just going through the process is valuable. It's a valuable education to help you to understand how to prove a lineage and all the steps that go into proving a lineage and the documentation that goes into a lineage. And if that's the only reason to join, that is a valuable thing to do. However, personally, I have found that I like the women within the chapter. I have found are bright, intelligent, caring women that I enjoy associating with. They are the type of people who are serving others and serving the community, and their patriotism, it goes right now. Sometimes we start to become naysayers about, America and that, and sometimes going down to those roots. These are the type of people that understood what it took to create this country, what it took to fight for our rights. And so I dearly, dearly love the association with these women and the traditions that they have created. Many small people in many small places do many small things that can alter the face of the world. So these American Revolution patriots, it took a lot of them to be able to stand up for what they believed and what they wanted, and they have changed the world and how the world sees freedom. And these Daughters of the American Revolution, I look at the records they have preserved and the monuments that and the love of patriotisms they have instilled, and it's just amazing. But then a big part of this is your research. And I hope that you all do take advantage of this research in some way and feel a gratitude for the shoulders that we stand on.